The question wasn't loud, but it was loud enough. Are you going to pay for that? She stood motionless in front of the interior display, studying the coat with the kind of focused attention that most shoppers never bothered to give. She wasn't there because she wanted to buy it. She was evaluating the stitching, the finish, the label, the quality of workmanship that justified, or failed to justify, the price tag hanging from its sleeve. She was a black woman, a full-figured woman. She wore a simple dress in a deep burgundy that fit her well, a large bag slung over one shoulder, and her natural hair pinned up in a bun that she had twisted into place that morning without much ceremony. She had been running between meetings since 7 a.m., and the bun showed it. Not unkempt, but honest, real. The kind of appearance that belonged to a woman who had more important things on her mind than performing elegance for strangers. She was accustomed to this kind of store. The polished floors, the cool artificial lighting, the faint scent of cedar and wealth that stores like this believed gave their merchandise additional value. She had grown up shopping in places like this with her mother, who had always dressed impeccably for such occasions. Not out of joy, but out of necessity, out of armor. She understood that armor. She had simply chosen, this particular afternoon, not to wear it. And she had already grown accustomed to that particular type of look. The one that measured before it greeted. The one that calculated before it smiled. The one that arrived before the question, before the approach, before the words were even formed. The look that had already made its decision and was simply waiting for confirmation. The security guard who approached her was a heavy-set man in his 40s, wearing a uniform that fit a little too tightly across the shoulders. His smile was practiced, professional in its shape, but empty in its intention. "Ma'am, may I see your bag?" She turned slowly, not with alarm, not with fear, with the specific, deliberate calm of a woman who had been here before and had long since learned that panic served no one in these moments, least of all herself. "Is there a problem?" "We received a report." The word hung in the air between them. A report. There had been no running, no alarm tripped at the door, no beeping sensor activated, no hand caught reaching for something that didn't belong to her. There was no footage being reviewed, no manager urgently radioed, no actual incident that had triggered the word report. There was only her, standing still, looking at a coat, bothering no one, and the accumulated weight of assumptions that had apparently been enough. She looked around the store with a measured gaze. 2 customers near the accessories section had their phones out, not shopping, watching. One of them angled the screen slightly, positioning it with the self-conscious guilt of someone who knew they were doing something unkind, but couldn't quite convince themselves to stop. A saleswoman near the register had leaned toward her colleague and was speaking behind her hand, eyes darting in her direction. From the back of the store, through the gap between 2 clothing racks, a woman in a navy blazer emerged. The store manager. Her expression was composed in the way that people compose themselves when they believe they are handling a situation, when in reality, they are simply managing their own discomfort at someone else's expense. "It's just protocol," the manager said, coming to stand beside the security guard. "If you have nothing to hide, this will only take a moment." She breathed in slowly through her nose. She looked at the manager. She looked at the guard. She looked at the customers with their phones. What burned inside her was not embarrassment. It was not shame. It was not even anger exactly. Anger would have been too simple, too hot, too easy to dismiss. It was exhaustion. The deep, specific, accumulated exhaustion of a woman who had spent decades being looked at before she was seen. Of walking into rooms and spending the first several minutes proving she belonged there. Of carrying invisible documentation everywhere she went, credentials, accomplishments, evidence of her right to take up space, because the world had made abundantly clear that her presence alone was never going to be considered sufficient. She was tired of it, but she had learned, a long time ago, that the moment she showed that tiredness was the moment she lost. So she kept her posture straight, her expression neutral, and said nothing more. The bag was opened on the counter. She unzipped it herself, calmly, methodically, without theatrics, and set it down on the polished surface beside the register. The manager and the security guard stood across from her. Two saleswomen hovered nearby, pretending to reorganize a display of scarves. Out came the wallet, a leather bifold in cognac brown, worn at the edges in the way of things that are used rather than displayed. The phone, screen down. A folded set of documents, a tablet in a slim black case, a small notebook, a pen, a tube of hand cream, keys on a ring with no decorative additions, no whimsical charms, no statement pieces. Just keys. Nothing from the store. Not a single item that didn't belong to her. The silence that followed was the particular silence of people who have been wrong and know it and are trying to locate somewhere to put that knowledge that isn't themselves. No one apologized. The manager straightened slightly. A small, involuntary repositioning that people do when they are trying to reclaim authority they have just squandered, and said, "These things happen. Security is never excessive." She began replacing her belongings in the bag. Wallet, phone, documents, tablet, notebook, pen, hand cream, keys. Each item returned with the same calm deliberateness with which it had been removed. "You accused me of theft," she said, "without evidence." "We didn't accuse you," the manager said. "We verified." The distinction was semantic. The experience was identical, but she didn't argue the point. She had not lived 43 years without understanding that certain people could hold contradictory things in mind simultaneously. I did nothing wrong, and I will not apologize, and believe both with complete sincerity. She zipped the bag closed, and then she did something that no one in that store had expected. She reached into the outer pocket of the bag, withdrew her phone, and made a call. The manager frowned. "Who are you?" "You can come up," she said into the phone, and ended the call. The manager's frown deepened. "Come up from where?" She said nothing. She settled the bag back onto her shoulder, smoothed the front of her dress, and waited. "Tutati?" The elevator at the far end of the store was not the customer elevator. It was the one marked Staff and Management Only, positioned beside the stockroom entrance. It was the elevator that, under ordinary circumstances, no customer would have any reason to use or any access to. It opened 2 minutes later. The man who stepped out was in his mid-50s, with the kind of build that came from decades of early mornings and discipline. He wore a charcoal suit that had been made for his specific measurements. Behind him came another man, younger, carrying a leather portfolio and moving with the focused efficiency of someone accustomed to keeping pace with someone else's authority. The manager's color changed. "Dr. Henrique?" Her voice came out smaller than she had intended. What are you doing here?" He didn't answer her immediately. He crossed the floor with measured steps and stopped when he reached the woman standing at the counter. He looked at her directly. Not the manager, not the guard, not the gathered saleswomen. Her. "Is everything all right?" She met his gaze with the same stillness she had maintained throughout the entire encounter. "It is now." The security guard took a single step backward. A small movement, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable to anyone watching. The instinctive physical retreat of a person who has just realized that the geometry of a situation has fundamentally shifted. The manager attempted to recover. "We were simply following store protocol. A report had been made that—" "Protocol based on what?" Henrique asked. He asked it quietly. That was perhaps the most unsettling thing about it. There was no raised voice, no dramatic confrontation, just the question, placed into the room with the calm certainty of a man who expected an answer and understood that the absence of one was itself an answer. No one spoke. She reached into the outer pocket of her bag a second time. She withdrew a folded document, crisp, formal, bearing the letterhead of a legal firm and the signatures that gave it binding weight, and placed it on the counter. It was a contract of acquisition. The store, its inventory, its lease, its outstanding liabilities, its staff contracts and management hierarchy, and every protocol that had been cited in the last 10 minutes, all of it had changed hands 7 days ago. And the name of the new owner was printed clearly on the signature line. Her name. The room absorbed this information in stages. The manager read the document, read it again, looked up at the woman in the burgundy dress with the large bag and the honest bun, and then looked back down at the paper as if hoping that a third reading might produce different information. It didn't. "I made a deliberate decision not to announce myself before this visit," she said. Her voice had not changed in volume or tone throughout the entire encounter. It remained level, direct, stripped of performance. "I wanted to see how this store actually operates, not how it operates when management knows the owner is watching." She let that settle. "I've done this with every location before a transition. You learn things from an unannounced visit that you cannot learn any other way." The manager's mouth opened, then closed. "What you've shown me today," she continued, "isn't a security failure. Your security responded quickly. Your staff communicated. Your manager arrived within minutes." She paused. "What failed today wasn't procedure. What failed was judgment. And judgment is harder to write a policy for, because it lives inside people, not manuals." Henrique, her legal counsel, her most trusted advisor, the man who had accompanied her through the acquisition process, and a dozen others before it, stood quietly to the side. He knew her well enough to know that this moment did not require him. She looked at each face in turn. The manager, still pale. The security guard, studying the floor. The two saleswomen who had stopped pretending to organize the scarves. "You looked at me and saw a problem to be managed," she said. "A report was made. By another customer, I presume. Someone who looked at me and reached the same conclusion without a single observable reason beyond what I look like. And rather than questioning the premise of that report, this team moved to confirm it." She picked up the acquisition contract from the counter and folded it back along its original creases. "I want to be clear about something. I'm not here to punish anyone for today. I'm here because this is my store, and what happens in my store matters to me." Enrique cleared his throat. He had a protocol he followed in these situations: the management restructuring conversation, the immediate personnel review, the cascade of HR procedures that typically followed a significant acquisition alongside a significant incident. He had already begun composing the relevant sections in his mind. "Effective today," he began, "we'll want to initiate a review of current management and—" "No," she said it without looking at him. She was still looking at the manager. Henrique paused. He had worked with her long enough to recognize this particular note in her voice. Not dismissal, but redirection. He waited. "Dismissal is easy," she said. "It's clean. It lets everyone move on and tell themselves that the problem left when the person did. But the person was never the whole problem." She gestured, a small open-handed motion that encompassed the room. "The problem is the assumption. And the assumption doesn't wear a name tag. You can't terminate it." The manager was listening now with a different quality of attention. Earlier she had been performing composure. Now she was simply still. "You're going to stay in your position," she said. "All of you are." No one had expected that. "But starting next week, every member of this staff, management, security, sales floor, stockroom, will complete a comprehensive training program. Not a 1-hour online module, not a checkbox exercise. An actual program run by people who know what they're doing, focused on bias, on assumption, on what it means to make a customer feel unwelcome before they've done a single thing to warrant it." She moved her gaze from face to face as she spoke. "This will not be optional. It will not be treated as a formality. I will receive completion reports, and I will receive follow-up assessments 60 days later, and again at 6 months, and I will return to this store unannounced, as I do with all my locations, because that is the only honest way to measure whether anything has actually changed." The saleswoman, who had been whispering behind her hand earlier, was now looking at the floor. The customer who had been filming had long since put away their phone and left. "I'm not doing this to humiliate anyone," she said. "I'm doing it because humiliation doesn't teach. It just drives things underground." She paused. "I want the behavior to change, not to disappear from view." She looked at the manager for a long moment. "Can you do that?" The manager's voice, when it came, was different from all the voices she had used in the previous 40 minutes. The composure was gone. What remained was simpler. "Yes." She picked up her bag from the counter. Enrique fell into step beside her as she moved toward the exit. Behind them, the store remained quiet in the particular way that spaces are quiet after something real has happened. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of people sitting inside their own thoughts, uncertain of what to do with them. At the door she paused. She turned back one final time, and she looked at the room, not at any individual face, but at the whole of it. The polished floors, the careful lighting, the clothing on its racks, waiting to be valued. "You're good at selling beautiful things," she said. "Work on being as good at welcoming the people who come to see them." The door swung open. She walked through it into the afternoon light, the city noise washing over her as the glass closed behind her. Enrique matched her stride, portfolio under his arm, saying nothing for a moment. "You handled that better than I would have," he said finally. "You would have handled it differently," she corrected. "Not better or worse." He considered this. "The training program. You've thought about this before." "I've thought about it every time it's happened to me," she said. "And it's happened enough times that I've had time to think carefully." They walked. The afternoon light was the color of late winter, thin and pale, slanting between buildings. "The manager," Enrique said. "You're confident she'll follow through?" "I'm confident she's scared enough to start," she said. "Whether she becomes convinced enough to continue is up to her." She adjusted the bag on her shoulder. "People can surprise you, in both directions." He nodded. They had a 4 o'clock meeting on the other side of the city. She had 3 more acquisition reviews scheduled before the end of the month, 2 calls with legal, and a board presentation she needed to finish revising. The afternoon was already pulling at her with its obligations, but she held the last hour in her mind for a moment before letting it go, not with bitterness, not with triumph, but with the steady, clear-eyed knowledge of a woman who had learned long ago that being underestimated was not the end of anything. It was simply a beginning, a different kind of beginning than she would have chosen, but a beginning nonetheless. The world was full of rooms that had not yet learned how to see her. She was, after all, very good at walking into rooms.